In the summer heat of 1990, Milwaukee's Oxford apartment stood like an angelic relic of an older city, a place where rent was cheap, walls were thin, and everyone minded their own business. For those who don't remember, Jeffrey Dahmer lived on the second floor in apartment 213. To most who passed him in the hallway, he was just another quiet tenant, polite, reserved, a little odd perhaps, but nothing alarming. Jeffrey Dahmer worked the night shift at the Ambrosia chocolate factory. The sweet heavy scent of cocoa clung to his clothes, mixing with something darker that no one could name. Neighbors would complain about strange smells seeping from under his door. Dahmer would shrug and offer simple explanations. Spoiled meat, a broken freezer, dead tropical fish. It was enough to deflect suspicion for a while. But inside that small one-bedroom apartment, horrors were unfolding that would stain Milwaukee's history forever. Dahmer's apartment was a chamber of nightmares. It held the remains of men he had lured from bars, bus stops, and street corners. Most were young men, many were men of color, and almost all were vulnerable, caught in cycles of poverty, rejection, or prejudice. To Dahmer, they were easy to approach, easy to disappear. Across the hallway lived Pamela Bass, who occasionally shared a beer or two. She never saw a hint of what he was capable of. He was soft-spoken, sometimes lonely. He'd talk about his grandmother, about the military, about being misunderstood. He didn't seem dangerous. She later said he seemed sad. That sadness was deceptive. It hid something monstrous. For years, the Milwaukee Police Department had fielded reports of missing young men, especially from the city's black and LGBTQ communities. Many of those families felt their pleas went unheard. In 1988, the first real warning came when Dahmer's neighbor, a woman named Glenda Cleveland, called police about a naked bleeding boy stumbling in the streets. Officers arrived, spoke briefly with Dahmer, and left, returning the 14-year-old boy to his. That boy was named Conarac Synthesymphome. The system failed him, and that failure allowed Dahmer to keep unaliving. At night, from the outside, the apartment complex seemed ordinary. Inside, it was the site of unimaginable cruelty, a place where the boundary between human and horror dissolved. Dahmer's crimes were hidden in plain sight, while Milwaukee went about its business, unaware that a serial killer lived among them. People who lived nearby would later talk about the strange, sour smell that crept through the vents, about hearing power tools late at night, about the feeling of unease they couldn't explain, but no one imagined what was really going on behind those beige walls. That summer, the city was alive with its usual rhythm. Church picnics, brewer games, block parties, and in the middle of that ordinary life, a man was meticulously documenting his descent into darkness, collecting body parts as trophies, photographing his victims, and performing rituals he alone could understand. Milwaukee would later come to see those years as the time when its innocence died, but in 1990 no one yet knew. Jeffrey Dahmer's victims weren't nameless faces in police reports. They were sons, brothers, and friends. People who laughed, danced, dreamed, and trusted. Anthony Sears, a 24-year-old aspiring model who loved fashion and dreamed of traveling. He was Dahmer's fifth known victim. Ernest Miller was a talented dancer who had studied ballet. He was unalived after meeting Dahmer outside a Milwaukee bookstore. Tony Hughes, deaf and unable to speak, communicated through notes. He and Dahmer met at a bar, where Dahmer wrote him messages on napkins. These men had lives filled with potential. Their families even now speak of the futures they never got to see. For many, the tragedy wasn't just the murder themselves. It was how invisible their loved ones had seemed to the authorities before Dahmer's arrest. Several victims were young black men. Many were gay, and their disappearances rarely drew media attention. Parents and friends would file missing persons reports only to be met with shrugs and silence. Milwaukee in the late 1980s was a divided city. Racially, economically, and culturally, entire neighborhoods were marginalized, their concerns dismissed. The LGBTQ community was still fighting for recognition and respect, and the AIDS crisis had already deepened mistrust between citizens and the police. Against that backdrop, Dahmer's crimes unfolded almost unnoticed. His victims were men who lived in the shadows of society, and Dahmer exploited that invisibility. When families like that of Oliver Lacey and Jeremiah Weinberger went to authorities, they often felt like they weren't taken seriously. If he had been white and straight, they would have looked for him, one mother told reporters later. But he wasn't, and no one cared until it was too late. For years, Dahmer moved through Milwaukee's gay bars, targeting men who trusted him, promising drinks, photos, money. He lured them back into his apartment, where they would never be seen alive again. Police reports show patterns, missed opportunities, and moments where intervention could have saved lives. One officer would later say, "We didn't realize what we were looking at. We didn't realize what kind of evil could exist in that form." Each of those men had a name, a story, and a family that still grieves. Their loss wasn't only personal, it ripped outwards through communities that already felt forgotten, deepening the wound between Milwaukee citizens and the institutions meant to protect them. By the summer of 1991, the pattern had reached its breaking point. The killings were escalating, the apartments' smell unbearable, and Dahmer's control slipping. What came next would shock the city and the world. It was the night of July 22nd, 1991, when Jeffrey Dahmer's world came undone. Tracy Edwards, a 32-year-old man, stumbled through the streets of Milwaukee, shirtless, wearing a single handcuff. His eyes were darted in panic as he flagged down two police officers. He told them that he had escaped from a man's apartment, a man who tried to unalive him. The officers followed Edwards back to the Oxford apartments, unaware they were walking into a scene that would change crime history forever. Inside apartment 213, Dahmer greeted them calmly. He seemed polite, even cooperative. But when one of the officers opened the refrigerator door, he froze. Inside was a freshly severed human head, staring back at him. The air was thick with the smell of decay and chemicals. From there, everything unraveled quickly. Drawers full of Polaroid photographs showed dismembered bodies in grotesque poses. Human remains were stored in the freezer. A 57-gallon drum filled with acid stood in the corner of the bedroom. On the walls were skulls, preserved parts, and notes, pieces of lives taken and cataloged like collectibles. One officer, visibly shaken, later said, "It was like stepping into hell. You can't unsee something like that." When Dahmer was arrested, he didn't resist. He told detectives everything, calmly, methodically, as if reciting a grocery list. He described each unaliving in detail, how he lured his victims, how he tried to preserve them, how he performed bizarre rituals with their remains. Detective Patrick Kennedy, who spent long nights interviewing him, said he'd never met someone so devoid of remorse yet so eerily honest. He was polite, he was articulate, but behind the politeness was absolute emptiness. News of Dahmer's arrest spread through Milwaukee like wildfire. Reporters swarmed the scene. Neighbors watched in disbelief as bags of evidence were carried out. Some cried, others vomited. Many just stood in stunned silence. For the families of missing men, the phone began to ring. One by one, they learned the truth. Their sons weren't missing anymore. They were among the remains inside that apartment. The Milwaukee police was immediately thrown under the harsh spotlight. The public wanted to know, how could this have gone on for so long? How could officers have returned Conrad Simpson's phone, a bleeding 14-year-old child, to Dahmer's arms just 2 months before the final arrest? Those questions would haunt the city for years. Milwaukee had never seen anything like it. The city's image, modest, hardworking, quietly Midwestern, shattered overnight. Suddenly, it was the setting of a national nightmare. Television trucks crowded the streets. Reporters from all around the world described the Milwaukee cannibal, turning the city's name into a symbol of horror. But for the people who lived there, this wasn't just a headline. It was their home, their neighbors, their pain. Vigils began appearing in the city's parks and churches. Candles burned beside photographs of the victims. Community leaders spoke about grief, but also about injustice. The killings had exposed deep cracks in Milwaukee's institutions, racial inequality, police negligence, and a lack of empathy toward marginalized groups. Glenda Cleveland, the woman who had tried to save Conrad Simpson's phone, became an emblem of that failure. She had called the police multiple times, begging them to take the boy seriously. They didn't. After the truth came out, she said softly, "I did everything I could. They just didn't listen." Her words echoed through every neighborhood meeting and protests that followed. Police officials held press conferences, apologizing, but it wasn't enough. Trust was broken. The LGBTQ community accused the department of systemic bias, claiming the officers ignored missing persons reports because the victims were gay. Black residents saw it as another example of how their safety was treated as secondary. Milwaukee was grieving but also awakening. Community organizers like Reverend Jesse Jackson visited the city, calling the case a tragedy built on indifference. Local pastors held interfaith services, pleading for understanding and unity. Parents kept their children indoors. People double-locked their doors. Even Dahmer's own neighbors couldn't make sense of it. "We were right next door," one said. "We heard him drilling. We smelled things, but we thought, no, it can't be what we think." Who could imagine that? As the city grappled with its shame and fear, the Oxford Apartments became a grim pilgrimage site. People came to stare, to try to comprehend what kind of evil had lived in such an ordinary place. When Jeffrey Dahmer walked into the courtroom in early 1992, the world watched. He was pale, emotionless, wearing glasses. There were no outbursts, no theatrics, just a quiet weight of 17 murder charges. The prosecution laid out the evidence in horrifying detail. Photographs, bone fragments, forensic testimony. But what truly silenced the courtroom were the words of the victims' families. Rita Isbell, sister of Errol Lindsay, stood up trembling, her voice breaking with rage. "I hate you, Jeffrey Dahmer. I don't ever want to see your face again." Her grief exploded in the room, a pain so raw that even the judge paused.
My name is Rita Isbell, and I'm the oldest sister of Errol Lindsay. Whatever your name is, Satan. I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control. I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you, mother. I hate you. This is out of control. Don't Jeffrey, I kill you. Look at me, mother. I can kill you.
What's your name, fast?
I can kill you. You don't have to do it.
That moment, captured on video, would become one of the most haunting images of the trial. Dahmer's defense argued that he was mentally ill, that he couldn't control his compulsions. The prosecution countered that he knew exactly what he was doing. He planned each unaliving, cleaned the scene, hid the evidence. He wasn't insane, he was calculating. The judge agreed. In February 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, effectively ensuring he would never walk free again. For some families, the verdict brought a measure of relief. For others, it changed nothing. Their sons were gone, and no sentence could bring them back. Outside the courtroom, protesters and mourners stood side by side. Some held signs demanding justice, others carried candles for the victims. A few whispered that they hoped Dahmer would face his own justice behind bars. Even in prison, he would remain an enigma. He spent much of his time alone reading the Bible, expressing vague remorse but never real understanding. To some, he seemed to seek forgiveness. To others, it felt like another performance. For Milwaukee, the trial was not closure. It was a mirror, forcing the city to confront its failures, its prejudices, and the dangers of ignoring those on its margins. The Oxford Apartments were torn down in 1992, less than a year after Dahmer's arrest. The city didn't want a memorial of horror standing in its midst. The lot was left empty, a scar that locals said would never heal. In the years that followed, Milwaukee tried to rebuild its sense of self. The police department underwent reforms, promising better sensitivity training and closer cooperations with minority communities. But trust wasn't easily repaired. For the victims' families, healing was slow and uneven. Some moved away, others became advocates for justice and education. Shirley Hughes, mother of Tony Hughes, said in an interview, "I don't want people to just remember Jeffrey Dahmer. I want them to remember Tony, who he was before he met that man." Churches and community centers organized remembrance events. Every July, murals of the victims appeared on city walls. Teachers began including discussions about the case in social studies classes, not to glorify it, but to teach empathy and vigilance. Still, the city has carried an unspoken stigma. When you say Milwaukee, one resident said years later, people still think Dahmer. The name became both curse and cautionary tale. For many, it symbolized not only the evil of one man, but the failure of an entire system to see the humanity in those it overlooked. Decades later, the shadows of Jeffrey Dahmer still lingers in Milwaukee. His crimes have been dissected in documentaries, dramatized in films, debated in classrooms. Each retelling reopens wounds, but also renews the city's determination to remember the victims, not just the killer. Families continue to speak out, ensuring that victims are not forgotten. Some relatives found peace and faith, others still can't forgive. The old neighborhood where the Oxford Apartments once stood is quieter now. A simple green field covers the spot. No plaques, no memorials, just grass and silence. For some, that's enough. For others, it feels like it's been erased. Every so often, visitors come, journalists, students, true crime fans, looking for traces of the story. Locals often turn away. That's not who we are, they say. That's who we were forced to face. The lasting impact of Dahmer's crimes isn't just in the horrors that he created, but in how a city was forced to confront its blind spots about race, class, and compassion. Milwaukee learned the hardest way that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they live quietly among us, unnoticed until it's too late. And yet amid the darkness, there's resilience. The people who survived, who spoke out, who demanded justice, they're the true legacy of this story. As one community leader said at a memorial years later, evil leaves scars, but it also reveals what kind of strength we have to heal. For Milwaukee, the healing never ends, the memory never fades, and the lessons about empathy, vigilance, and the cost of indifference continue to echo through every corner of the city. In the end, Jeffrey Dahmer's story isn't just about one man's evil. It's about the lives that were stolen, the families left behind, and a city that had to stare into the mirror and ask itself how it failed to see the warning signs.